The story of a people is told best by those who live it out daily. And when the history of that community is informative, inspirational, and insightful, it should then be shared with the world. The Clio Exchange does that.
And was it during that period that you came in contact with Miss Bethune?
Well, in 1937, I was working at the Harlem branch of the YWCA, and I had the assignment to escort Eleanor Roosevelt, who was then in the White House, to a meeting Mrs. Bethune was holding. And it turned out that it was the National Council of Negro Women. And after I got her into the meeting, Mrs. Bethune said, "Come back, we need you," and I've been back ever since. But it was that she was in Washington at that time was also a major force, because Mrs. Bethune was the first Black person to have an official relationship to a president. Booker T. Washington, who we have here, was always called upon, but it was not an assignment, it was not a position. Mary McLeod Bethune was the advisor on minority affairs. And so that to me was a growing experience, working in the daytime for the YWCA, working evenings and weekends with Mrs. Bethune.
Tell me about that experience. As a young person working with her, that had to be tremendous.
Well, it was a tremendous experience because Mrs. Bethune was clearly a Black woman, but she felt so good about herself that she helped you. As a child, I was fairly shy, but when I worked with Mrs. Bethune, I came to understand the importance of asserting yourself and of what you believe. One of the stories that I always like is Mrs. Bethune never would call for an appointment with the president. She would call Mrs. Roosevelt and she would say, "Mrs. Roosevelt, there is such and such a problem. You know what? The president needs to see me." And that's how she got to
And she got the appointment.
And she got the appointment.
How about
But she also would never let race, she would never accept to be belittled because of her race. I remember she told a story of being on a train, and a white conductor came and looked at her to take her ticket. And he said, "Auntie, where's your ticket?" And she said, "I looked at this white man and I asked him, 'Which of my sister's sons are you?'" And he moved on. So that she had a sense of humor,
right.
and she knew how to cut through things. And that to me has been very helpful, because I don't tend to deal with trivia and stay on little things and gripe, because I learned from her that you don't get very far.
That's right, that's right. And of course today, understanding how important your legacy is, I think gives you the kind of strength that one needs to stand like Mrs. Bethune did. And Dr. King is the same kind of personality and commitment to.
Yeah, I first met Dr. King. He was 15 years old.
15.
And I was the house guest of Dr. and Mrs. Mays at Morehouse College. And Mrs. Mays asked me to come home early. I was working in Atlanta for the National YWCA. And she said, "I want you to meet Benny's favorite student." And it turned out to be Martin Luther King Jr. It was very interesting, though, to sit at a dinner table then and hear him wondering and saying whether he'd go into ministry or law or medicine. And then 10 years later to find 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man, he became a leader, became my leader, all of our leaders.
All of our leaders, yeah, that's right. And that's just not the African American community.
No, world leaders.
Humanity.
That's right.
Yeah.